What's up, everybody? Welcome into another edition of SSPN Offseason, Ethan. We are 1 week further into the Olympics as we are now in the thick of the Olympic tournament,
Ah.
but we are also 1 week closer to training camp in
Ooh.
Spurs basketball, Ethan.
Which one is more exciting to you, Jude?
I'm gonna be honest, training
Yeah.
camp and Spurs basketball.
Right on.
I'm
Right
I'm
on.
I'm glad that we get to watch Victor Wembanyama basketball in a capacity this week, Ethan. But at the same time, as we've talked about kind of throughout this Olympic tournament going into it and talking about it a little bit last week, at the end of the day, it is kind of just a race to see who gets silver. I hate to put it that way, but it's just
Mhm.
kind of you never know what can happen in a FIBA game. But with this team on the Olympics, Ethan, it's kind of hard to see a path to victory for anybody else against Team USA. Maybe we can get a competitive game at the end, but
Mm.
uh, for the most part, as the last game against Brazil showed,
Yeah.
um, there's like best players. You got Ant Edwards coming off the bench, man. Like
Right. I saw a stat. He has the third least minutes, but he's averaging the most points per game, and he's like the most efficient player as well. So he is out of this world. And I mean, the only thing you can kind of hope for, just as a basketball fan, is like reminiscent of what happened in 2008, where in the preliminary rounds, the U.S. blew out Spain by 30 or 40 points, and then the gold medal game, it was like really close, like down to the wire. Obviously, USA still came out on top, but I don't see that happening, Jude. That's a fool's dream.
this team is just ridiculous, as we've talked about on
Yeah.
multiple other episodes going into all of this. But we're still going to talk about them a little bit more because, again, group play has finished. We had
Yep.
the first quarterfinal games on Tuesday, and we're just going to go ahead and go through all of those with all the people here, Ethan. So we'll start off with Germany and Greece. Um, this was a matchup between Giannis and of course, a lot of this German team who is also undefeated, as you can see in the Olympics so far. The only other undefeated team, well, actually, let me stop myself. Well, no, France lost to Germany, so I'm pretty sure they're well, maybe Serbia might not have a
No, I
loss.
don't think they're. I think Serbia lost to US.
You're right. You're right. There you go. That's what I thought. I thought they were the
Yeah.
only undefeated team, but I just wanted to stop myself there before I just said a statement that wasn't true.
You're good.
But Franz Wagner, as you can see, has really been leading this German team. 18 points. Really just a shooter kind of in this game, leading the way for them. But you got Dennis Schroeder off the bench, 13 points, 8 assists. You got some other NBA players in there with obviously the other Wagner brother and Mo Wagner. Some of you guys might remember old boy Isaac Bonga.
Oh,
He
yeah.
was on the Lakers for a little bit a couple years ago. And then, of course, you got Daniel Tice in there as well. And the thing about Germany for me is that last year they won the FIBA World Cup. And the US plays in the FIBA World Cup, but they're not playing with this Olympic roster. And
Right.
that's usually kind of how the FIBA World Cup goes. A lot of times the US will still win it. But last year, was kind of an example of how, if it's not the US, it can kind of be an indicator of maybe who could potentially be, in that final against the US that we assume will happen in this Olympics. So that's always kind of a good little just precursor because usually the FIBA World Cup happens a year before the Olympics. So
Right.
again, if it's some other team other than the US, that probably gives you an idea of who maybe the best of the rest is, in these teams. But Giannis Antetokounmpo went down in this game, still put up 22 points, did what he could, but this Germany team once again, they're coming off a win. They've got a lot of chemistry, and they also just bluntly had more NBA talent.
Yeah, Germany's got a lot of depth on this team. I know overall their team is kind of tall, but they don't have like a dominant big. Like Tice is like 6'9", 6'8", even. So I think that's ultimately what's going to bite them in the back is when they go up against France with two 7-footers, Victor Wembanyama, Rudy Gobert, the U.S. with Embiid, AD, and Bam, and then of course, guy just blanked on the team. What's the third team? Serbia with Jokic as well. Greece has Giannis, but he only had 2 rebounds in this game. And other than Giannis, the Greek team is not the best. Obviously, they were only 1-3 in this tournament. So shout out Germany. I don't think that they're going to get the silver medal. I still think their size will bite them in the back.
Yeah, Mo Wagner is probably the biggest guy that they have on the roster. And as much as I like me some Mo Wagner minutes off the bench, Ethan, when I watch the Magic,
Mhm.
that is not the same as a Rudy Gobert and a Victor Wembanyama,
Yeah.
as you just said. And they were able to out rebound Greece. Are they going to be able to do that in some of the other games, like you said leading up? We'll have to see. But I will say, I still think they have a chance to beat France. I really like your point there. We'll get into that a little bit more when it comes to predictions. But they're just kind of continuing their hot streak after
Yeah.
winning the FIBA World Cup.
A lot of cohesion on this team for sure. That's an underrated aspect to it.
Faux show, Ethan. But that brings us in to this is probably my favorite game that's happened right here. And that's because of course, we have a couple former Spurs on this Australia team, but really it's Patty Mills. This could have been his last. Did he announce his retirement coming into this year?
I actually don't know. Um,
Ooh, I
but
just
also
read a
your box score hasn't changed yet.
Yes, thank you. I just came back and I realized that that was the case. So did
There
I
we
switch
go.
it up
Now it's
there?
changed.
Okay,
Yes.
there we go. Yeah, I was circling Patty Mills' stat line here as he was the leading scorer for Australia. I believe I want to say that I saw something about his retirement here. Let me look that up real quick just to confirm. But at the least, this is going to be his last Olympic game.
Mm,
So it was just really good to see, Patty have one last,
right.
26 piece, as he goes off into the sunset.
Patty Mills has to be regarded as one of the greatest Olympic basketball players ever, and FIBA players ever as well. Like, he has to be up there with guys like Manu. I know he never won the gold medal. Manu did, but in terms of how they elevated their game in international play compared to how they played a role in the NBA, we're all familiar with FIBA Patty. I'm glad he was able to get his amazing numbers even this year at 37, 38 years old. Jude, I don't remember exactly how old he is, but obviously a lifelong Spur in our eyes and in our hearts. So if he is retiring soon, we appreciate everything that he did for us and everything he did for basketball globally.
Yes. So Patty is 35. It feels like
He
he's
feels like
30.
he's ancient, man.
Yes.
We really, I really overestimated there. That's on
Well,
me.
it was only, three years or so.
Yeah,
But 2
it's a big
3.
difference in basketball.
But that is completely true, especially in basketball. But what I can confirm, I don't know about the NBA. I don't know if I had that right, but he did announce that he is retiring from Australian basketball.
Ah, well, there you go.
So this was his final game, went out on a bang. Love to see that. Even though he lost in overtime to the Serbia team, they forced overtime. I know that it was like 82-80. I believe Serbia was up. And I didn't get to catch this game because this game started at like 6, 7 in the morning. Um, but Australia had to hit a shot to tie it to force OT. So this
Mm,
was definitely a really fun one. You can see Dante Exum, Josh Giddey, Jock Landale also in there. But for the most part, that's really the only guys that contributed. You could say Duop Reith, Reith threw in 7 points. That's an old LSU guy. I didn't even
mm.
realize he was on the Australian team. So shout out to him. And Matthew Dellavedova still logging 11 minutes. Dyson Daniels, another name there too, even though didn't do too much on the box score. Um, just wasn't enough against this Serbian team, which of course was led by Nikola Jokic. It's so crazy because not everybody's, well, a lot of the US, that's just kind of the nature of the team. They're not going to get the same stats that they get in the NBA, right?
Mhm.
Um, but a lot of other players, their play hasn't necessarily translated, on other teams. Like maybe Giannis didn't look exactly the same. Not to say he didn't have an impact, but exactly the same that he does under the NBA rule set.
Right.
Nikola Jokic has continued to look exactly the same. And obviously his play style is very uh, favorable whenever it comes to the FIBA style of play. But another 14 rebound, 8 assists, 4 steals, 1 block, 21 points overall for Nikola. And of course, Bogdan Bogdanovic also throwing up 6 assists there with 17 points as well. Vasily Majcic, that's another name that is also in the NBA. He had 14 and 6. He played on the Hornets and the Thunder last season. But really, the thing with this team, when we talk about Germany and their like kind of cohesion, you may only see like 3 or 4 NBA guys on this list, but they play together so well,
Yeah.
man. obviously their test against the US in the semifinals that's coming up is going to be very tough. But there's a reason that they were able to knock off a team like Australia.
Against the US, they're gonna have to shoot better than 31% from 3. Like, if they can get that number up to 40 or even higher, then they have a chance, but if they don't, I'm afraid the talent on the US is just gonna be too big for them.
Yeah, I think despite the score, whether it's a blowout or they somehow make it competitive,
Mhm.
Nikola Jokic will
He's
still
gonna
get
play
close.
well.
He's gonna get close to a triple double. I think Bogdanovich will play well too. But you see on top of Bogdanovich and Jokic here, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then if you want to count Petrusev's, I know he only had 9 points, but that's almost 5 double-digit scorers.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's going to happen against the U.S.
right. I doubt it.
But with all that being said, love to see Patty getting one last, big game in the Olympics in his final stand. And of course, what Jokic is doing continues to be impressive. But let's get to the game of the hour, Ethan. France versus Canada. I was able to watch this one for the most part. I was at work, so, I might have to deal with some customers from time to time. So I wasn't able to catch every single little bit, but for the most part, I was able to catch most of this game. As you can see, did I change the tab here, Ethan?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, just making sure that I got that. Um, France started off 23-10. So they really were up about 10 points for the majority of the game. As you can see on the box score, though, Canada did start to chip into that lead kind of going into the third quarter, but they really didn't get it to single digits until the fourth quarter. As much as it was kind of, Canada was hanging around in the game after a little bit of a slow start. Uh, when I was watching it, I was just kind of like, okay, France has got this. Yes, it's still kind of close, but they have too much size. That's the other thing. Canada was starting, this whole tournament starting Dylan Brooks at the 4, and that's not their fault. They just have the people from their country on their roster.
Right.
But when you're matched up with Victor Wembanyama and Rudy Gobert, and even like a Gershon Yabusele, who had 22 points in this game. He's a bigger body, than Dylan Brooks. So the point is they were just at a size advantage, for the majority of the game. Even Lasor, the center off the bench, had 13 and 5. I haven't really seen him have a stat line like that so far in the Olympics. I may have just missed that if he did, but the whole point was Lasor wasn't even, as big, at least just eyeballing him,
Mhm.
because the height that they have listed is like in meters. And me
Mhm.
being the American Texan that I am, I don't know how that translates,
Right.
exactly to inches and feet. But he looked a little smaller, like significantly smaller, around like, I would say like 6'10 max, but I'd probably guess more like 6'8, 6'9. And even he was still able, to do some work against Canada. But the bigger thing in this game was the way that France was able to weather the storm. Wemby made some big plays in the fourth quarter. And as much as if you look at the field goals, right, from Victor, this doesn't feel like his best game. D Wade was talking about it during the game on the broadcast. There were so many things that he does. Obviously, there's so many things that he does just because of his length. But even that aside, he was doing a lot of things that don't show up on the box score, to make an impact. He kind of knew that his shooting was off a little bit. And as you can see, still was able to be a force on the boards with 12, was able to dish out 5 assists, had 3 steals as well as a block. I felt like he might have had more than just one block. But the one that does stick out in my head was a clutch block on Dylan Brooks late in the game. I think it
Mhm.
was a 5 point game. So that would have cut it to, almost, that would have been 3 points right there and really would have put the pressure on France. But because he got the block, I can't remember if he got the bucket on the other end after that play, but I know for a fact that it led to a bucket for France in transition after he got that block. And that was a crucial play that I remember because Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was really getting hot. He had just got up to 25 points at that point. This is around like the 2 minute mark or so left in the fourth quarter. And if I'm Canada, I'm just screaming, get the ball to Shai. Like get the ball to Shai under any means necessary. It doesn't even matter if he's double teamed, just get him the ball. And Dylan Brooks forced up a shot kind of at the elbow, right in front of Wemby too. I was like, it was kind of, I know we talk about Dylan Brooks, but all the Dylan Brooks stuff with him being a Rocket now and the rivalry and his antics in the past, like all that aside, that's the play that stuck out to me in this game because it did end up being close in the fourth quarter. I feel like if they would have got it to Shai Gilgeous and maybe he hits a step back three or something there, that really could have changed the momentum of the game. But instead, Wemby gets the block and they extend their lead back up to 7,
Mm.
with about a minute and 40 or so left. And that was really the biggest play of the game for me. But, as we're looking at this box score, I say that was the biggest play of the game. I see Evan Fournier down there with 15 points. The other
Mhm.
argument that you could say is the biggest play of the game was Evan Fournier's Steph Curry like dagger that he hit from like almost freaking half court.
Yeah.
And Wemby kind of lost a little bit track of time. He also kind of got the ball in not the best situation and was having to deal with some double teams, but he got it to Evan Fournier. Evan Fournier just catches it again from almost like the corner of the next to the half court line, where it meets the baseline, and he just chunks up this prayer, and it wasn't nothing but net, but it wasn't bank either. He just drilled it,
Mm.
um, and that really put the dagger in Canada. You could kind of see it on. On Shai Gilgeous's face when that happened there. I felt bad for him because he had 27 points, 5 boards, 4 assists. Maybe not the most efficient shooting night, but he was definitely the reason that they were back in the game and were able to fight back. But Yabusele with 22 points,
Mm.
2 threes, 8 of 9 from the line, and Cordinier. I'm so sorry for butchering some of these French names, but he was going off too. 4 for 5 from three. He was not somebody that was really on my radar. Obviously, I've watched some of these games and I've seen him. But for him to have 20 points and for Yabusele to have 22 points on a night where Rudy Gobert has 0 points, only plays 3 minutes, and Victor didn't have the best shooting night as well. That was super crucial for this French team in this game. And it's also kind of a testament to the depth that they have on this team. When you have both of those guys getting 20 points, when Rudy and Victor aren't able to maybe be as much as we haven't seen Rudy be the most offensive impact in this Olympics so far. We've definitely seen it from Victor, so that was huge for them. And of course, you can't discount Lasor's contribution and Evan Fournier as well.
Yeah, I would say there's two sides to this for France. It's one great positive game for their role players, their depth guys going into the next round. They can build off this momentum. Their confidence will be high, which is great. But at the same time, Wembanyama's shooting, I know you touched on it. He did a lot of other things, but to me, the most concerning thing, he took 10 shots, only 4 of them were 2-point shots. So if I'm the coach, I got to figure out a way to get him the ball closer to the rim and let him score, especially against Canada, where they don't,
Yeah.
like you said, Dwight Powell's 6'8". He's their biggest guy, and he got Dylan Brooks. I know he's a physical player. I know he pushes against Wemby and tries to get him outside of the paint, but you have to get him in better positions to take advantage of his size.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Obviously, you got to get if France wants to accomplish their goals here, it starts with Victor. As much
Right.
as you love to see the play from the other role players, I totally get your point there. Um, but with all that being said, let's see what the some other numbers from Canada down here. I believe they were in some foul trouble. This is what I wanted to talk about. As you can see, everybody in their starting lineup had at least 3 fouls. Lou Dort had 5, and I can't remember if that's foul out or not in
It
the
is.
Olympics. That's what I thought. That's what I thought. And Dylan Brooks had 4. He got close. You can look at Dylan. I hate to keep harping on Dylan Brooks because as much as I say this about Dylan Brooks, Dylan Brooks could school me in basketball any day of the week on a lot of different levels. But there were just a lot of quick shots in the shot clock that I noticed from him. And when you combine that with being 1 for 9, that was a little tough. But I say that, and really, probably somebody who should get a little bit more, I hate to say blame, but that's just kind of the nature of the conversation, is Jamal Murray off the bench, 3 for 13, 1 for 4, because we've seen games like that from Dylan Brooks. You're not expecting him to
Yeah.
shoot well every night. You want him to play physical, play defense. He had 3 steals. You know what I mean? Just be the kind of pest type of player that he is.
Yeah.
But if Jamal Murray shot 9 for 13, maybe they win this game.
Right.
I know that's simplifying it, looking at the box score, and I believe Jamal didn't look the same to me. He still looks a little injured. I don't remember exactly what his injury is, but I remember I was in a group chat of some sort, and somebody sent a tweet, that was mentioning or was saying that they thought he still looked a little injured, and it was
Yeah, I saw that
he
too.
had a lingering injury from the playoffs. Still, I say that Luka Doncic was hurt throughout the entire postseason,
Right.
and he played through it and was able to make shots. And then on top of that, still tried to go make the Olympics in the pre-Olympic qualifying tournament and put up a bunch of numbers. Obviously, Jamal Murray and Luka aren't the exact same players,
Mhm.
um, but that's just an example of how guys can play through injuries and
Right.
still execute. So I do want to kind of give him that asterisk, if you will, but still in such a close game like this, and as you can see, the second half comeback. Imagine if he shot a little bit better.
Yeah, removing health from the question mark, I'll put it in this way: Jamal Murray, Evan Fournier, both guys off the bench for their respective teams that are scorers. If you look at their NBA, careers, Evan Fournier is struggling to stay on a team and stay in a rotation. Jamal Murray is an all-star level point guard. Like you would
And a
never have
champion.
expected a champion. You would never expect Fournier to outscore him, but by twice as many points as Jamal Murray had. So that's assuming he's healthy. That's unacceptable, unfortunately, if you're Canada.
Yeah, really. And when you look at Canada, the only other person that Shea just really got help from was RJ Barrett.
Yeah,
Obviously, some other guys did hit some shots, but France, again, they had 4 double-digit scores in this game and 2 off the bench, where
right.
Canada didn't have any off the bench.
100%.
So, we'll see what happens with some of the scheming moving forward. That France Germany game is going to be really interesting, but hopefully Wemby can bounce back offensively because of the other games he's had throughout the Olympics and the Olympic preseason as well. I'm not too worried about that. And this was also technically his first I know they've been playing in group play and all the games matters, but this was his first Olympic tournament game officially, and it's in Paris.
Yeah.
There could have been some nerves there, but I also want to give Canada their credit as well.
In France versus Germany, I'm taking France for sure.
Okay. Okay.
Like 100%. I believe that Victor Wembanyama's mindset, his mentality will not allow him to have another poor shooting night. Like we've seen him do this with the Spurs on big nights with big games. I think on the Olympic play in his
Mhm.
hometown, he straps up his shoes and he plays a much better game.
We're just going to go ahead and jump ahead a little bit because we're going to do predictions for the semifinal games. And we still got to go over USA Brazil, but we can do the predictions for France and Germany right here. And then after we go through the US, we can talk about US and Serbia. Honestly, Ethan, I was leaning Germany just
Mm,
because they haven't lost. And again, the FIBA World Cup point that I made earlier. But the point you made about size, I think, is really important. But honestly, that's not what kind of changed my mind here. It's what you just said. It's the fact that he's coming off of an off game and he's
mhm.
going to really kind of want to reassert himself and make that statement. And as we mentioned earlier, he still did everything else the same. He still had the same defensive impact. He had the impact on the boards. He was able to find some passes and get some steals. You know what I mean? But like you
Mhm.
said, I mean, I don't remember exactly what his stat line was after the Rockets game earlier this year. I believe in around January, where he only had about 12 points. It was one of his lower box scores
Mhm.
of the postseason so far, or excuse me, of his regular season this year. But I'm pretty sure there was a bounce back game
Yep.
after that.
There almost always is. And I also think France has a lot of versatility and a lot of strength to compete with Franz Wagner and some of Germany's wings. And don't sleep on my guy Frank Ntilikina. He is locking up Dennis Schroeder. Mark my words.
Good to know. Good to know about that. I know Frank Ntilikina went 0 for 4, 0 for 3 in
Doesn't
this
matter.
game.
Doesn't
But
matter.
you know what I was about to say though, Ethan?
What?
That he's been shooting well throughout the tournament for the most part. Even if it's, not double digit scoring, he's usually not going completely over.
Frank the Tank. Frank the Tank.
So definitely a good role player for France. And it will be super fun to watch that game in Paris. Every crowd with them is
Yeah.
it's just such a cool environment to see. But that goes ahead and leads us to the United States and Brazil. And this was not much of a game. I,
Your
I
box score didn't change.
Oh, thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. That leads us to, again, the
Yeah,
United States and Brazil, which was not
blowout.
much of a game. I hate to put it that way, but it is just kind of the truth. Bruno Caboclo, NBA legend, 30-6.
Hey man, he at one point he was like the lowest rated player in 2K My Team, I believe. So shout out him. He is a legend to was it Chris Smoove or some YouTube creator for 2K was a huge fan of him because of his length. He was kind of a cheat
I know
code
who
in
you're
one of the
talking
2Ks.
about.
I can't
Yeah,
remember who it was. Uh,
me
but
either.
yeah, this was a blowout. Other than him, and I guess you could say DePaula off the bench, who had 15 points. I think everybody knew this was going to be a United States win going into it. Like, it's bad when ESPN is searching for like a story here. And I remember the big line was like, I don't know, Brazil's really good at offensive rebounding, and the U.S. has struggled there. And I'm like, dude, they have Bruno
Do you see
Caboclo.
the numbers?
Yeah, it wasn't even remotely close. 46 overall rebounds to 34. I could technically we tied offensive rebounds, but defensively it was 35 to 23. So not even a struggle.
Yeah, another great game from Ant off the bench, second amount of highest points on the team. And really, the reason that D Book was the leading scorer is just because he got, well, you could say that he shot a little bit better than Ant. But when you're surrounded by LeBron James, Steph Curry, and Drew Holiday, like when I'm watching these games and it's so crazy with Devin Booker because he could just play catch and shoot.
Yeah,
And it's like that Devin Booker and catch and shoot is just ridiculous. And again,
deadly.
that ties into this team that we've talked about. Um, Here's the prediction that I'll make for the U.S. We saw in the first game, Kevin Durant had a 20-point game. I know LeBron did also.
Mhm.
I think that, because, and this wasn't a bad game from KD. He's playing his role. It was a blowout. I think we're going to get a big game from KD, another 20-point game from KD off the bench in one of the next games, whether that's the semifinal or the final.
I'm taking Steph Curry to have his big breakout
Ooh.
game next game. It's against Serbia, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, he is going to go crazy. I don't know to what extent, but I feel like he's been relatively quiet. Like he hasn't been terrible, but he hasn't been great. He's just kind of been playing, like you're saying, like a role as like a
Mhm.
floor general point guard that spaces the floor. I think he takes over.
Yeah, as much as I said KD and I still stand by that, really, Steph is gonna pop at some point.
Mhm.
He hasn't yet, but there's gonna be a game where he catches fire from 3 and he just does Steph things. Um, the one thing I will say though about Steph that's not showing up on the stat sheet is his defense. D
Right.
Wade
Yes.
D Wade pointed that out in the game. His ball pressure, the way he's picking up guys full court, just having his hands in passing lanes, even if he doesn't get a deflection, just making it a more crowded lane. Um, I know in the NBA, a lot of times over Steph's career, maybe his defense has been the thing that's been criticized the most. In this circumstance, obviously against Brazil is not the same as like maybe playing like a loaded Cavs team, in all the 4 years that the Cavs and Warriors played in the finals. But still, it's nice to see Steph's defensive skill showcased on this U.S. team.
Right. 100%.
And that leads us in to the United States' next game, and that is against Serbia. We're going to have the same prediction here. We're both going to pick the U.S. What I will say is this will be way more, or not way more, it's going to be more competitive than the first game.
I would agree with that. It's going to take a monumental effort from Nikola Jokic, and I don't even think it's like a Jokic versus Embiid
Right.
thing. It's a Jokic versus Embiid versus AD versus Bam, right? And then you got to take
Versus
into
the rest of
account,
the team getting
yeah,
double teamed by these guys.
double team by LeBron, Jason Tatum. These are long, big. Kevin Durant, 7 feet tall. It's gonna take a 50-point triple double from Nikola Jokic for them to come out on top, or just like a terrible shooting night. Like we just can't buy a three. But I really don't think that's gonna happen.
Which then will lead us to another France US final. I know
Right.
last episode I wasn't sure, I forgot. My bad there. But at the same time, I think I'd just seen something about the significance of maybe France getting a medal. Maybe obviously that if I did see something about that, it had to be about them potentially getting gold with
Mm,
Victor.
yeah.
But the key difference between the 2021/2020 Olympics, because it was played in 2021 after, it was supposed to happen in 2020, is there was a ton of opt outs. I'm
Yeah.
not saying the finals not going to be competitive. I'm just saying that there was no LeBron, there was no Steph, there was no KD. I don't even know if Devin
There was
Booker played.
KD
Okay, there was KD.
and
Thank
Devin
you.
Booker.
See, I just don't remember that Olympics very well, Ethan, as you can see.
And Zach
um,
LaVine.
but that one just, I think just because of the COVID stuff and there not being fans, I just don't remember it as much. But still, no Steph and LeBron. I was right on that, correct?
Correct. Yes. No Steph, no LeBron.
Not the full kitted out US roster. So I don't think that it will be as, and I know there's Wemby, and we love Wemby more than anyone else. I don't know if it'll be a single digit game again.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough.
I don't think it'll be a 20-point win either.
It's
But
gonna be tough because we've seen what AD and Embiid have been able to do to Wemby. As much as we love him, Embiid drawed 70, and AD is Anthony Davis, and so he held Wemby to civilian statistics. Bam and him can go back and forth, but now he has to go up against all three. And Rudy Gobert didn't play very well last game; only had 3 minutes. I think there was like a rumor that he hurt his hand too.
So I was
Um,
just looking that up, not to interrupt you, but
no, you're fine.
just to confirm on this because I was like, why did he play 3 minutes? So he does have a finger injury, but the
Yeah.
coach called the benching matchup related. So it was technically a benching, like he could have played through it. Regardless, he's going to play in this game if France gets there, and he'll probably play against Germany too.
Yeah, they will absolutely need him against the USA. As much as people disrespect Rudy Gobert,
Right,
and I occasionally make jokes as well,
right.
they will need him 110%.
What do you think is going to be the key to that final?
France shooting very well. That unfortunately, that's where we are with how
No,
dominant the US has been. Is you have to pray that the US shoots poorly from three, and you have to pray that your ball movement and cohesion is so otherworldly that you just have a million wide open threes and you shoot like 50% and just double and beat them on analytics alone.
and they're going to need another giant big game from Victor, in my opinion, too.
Oh yeah, I mean he's gonna have to be the guy that gets double teamed. And Batum had 0 points last game. He's gonna need to have a few because he's an amazing corner 3 point shooter. He's had a lot of big shots in his career. They're gonna need him to step up.
And those two guys that stepped up in the last game,
Right.
Yabusele and Cordonier, they're going to probably, even if Victor's having a big game and some of these other guys like a Fournier or a Batum are shooting better, those guys aren't going to have 20 points necessarily, but you
Hmm.
may need them to get close to, double digit points. Because here's the thing, even if you shoot well, if the US is shooting the lights out, which again, it's like if D Book or Steph, or even guys off the bench that I'm forgetting, Tyrese Halliburton can just be catch and shoot guys who are left wide
Hmm.
open because you've got all these other all stars to worry about. You're just they everybody playing the US is starting from behind to an extent, if the US is going to executes basically. Now if they
Hmm.
don't, like you said, if you pray that they don't shoot well, then obviously that'll give you a little bit of a better opportunity. But
Hmm.
I'm thinking about this final too. I feel like this could be a game where LeBron imposes his will as well. He had that 23-point game to start off. He's kind of been facilitating a little bit more.
Hmm.
He is almost 40 years old. As much as he's doing otherworldly things at his age, he may kind of just be managing it a little bit before he gets to that final where he can really, let out and that last burst of energy as he's kind of not necessarily coasted through these games, but been more of a facilitator.
Right. I could see that. It's also a legacy opportunity for him, and we know he's all about chomping at the bit for that sort of thing. Um, but if I'm Steve Kerr, my game plan is the opposite of what everyone is going to be expecting. It's whoever offense on Victor Wembanyama. I am isolating him. I'm going one on one with him in the post with Embiid, AD, whoever, and I'm going to try and get him in foul trouble and just be physical the entire time and hope that wears him down offensively as well. Because if you can get him sitting down in that first quarter with 2 quick fouls, game's over.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Ethan. Let's get into the final two topics that we have today. We have two little bits of Spurs news. So, if you guys remember, a couple weeks ago, we made about a 20-minute video on Lauri Markkanen. And as much as we saw all of the potential pathways for the Spurs to make this trade and maybe have the best offer on the table, at the end of the episode, our conclusion was Danny Ainge is trying to swindle and he's probably going to resign. And maybe he does get traded, one day. Maybe it's at
Mhm.
the deadline. Maybe it's sometime in the future with this new contract that we got today. Um, But that is the big news, is that Lauri Markkanen signed a 5-year extension with the Utah Jazz. And we kind of just felt like at the end of our video that he probably doesn't get traded, specifically for that reason, where I kind of alluded to that Lauri has mentioned that he would love to stay in Utah, and if he did get traded, he did want, an extension for sure. So that got done. I don't think these Lauri Markkanen trade rumors are necessarily going to go anywhere, even with this contract extension. But I don't know if the Spurs will be as involved. Maybe they will. And if that happens, then it's just going to be a whole nother mess. But these are me and Ethan's final thoughts on this. If we see this swirling again, maybe we'll mention it in passing. But this will be our last segment on all of this, because I think this taught us that despite all of these rumors, all these things that you can hear, kind of what we thought at the end of that episode is what ended up playing out.
I would say the trade rumors are completely closed. If you hear anything, shut your ears. The only time they will reopen is when the Spurs are like literally like the fourth seed and we're ready to make that championship push. I could see them opening up then, but that's at least 2 years away.
Right. And honestly, I think before then he gets traded somewhere else.
Very likely. And then by the time we're ready, maybe he's washed. maybe he's reached that
I
point.
mean, he is 27. You know what I mean? He's on
Yeah.
a different timeline than like a Victor, for example.
Not washed, but you know what I mean. It feels like he's at his peak of
Older.
trade value, and eventually he'll probably plateau to like a Bradley Beal, Zach LaVine plateau level. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get exactly what you're saying. Any final thoughts on the Lauri thing?
Let's just move on.
I'm with you. We're
Let's just
done
get
with
out of here.
that. You know what we can talk about though?
What's that?
Malachi Flynn
Malachi Flynn.
signing a 1-year non-guaranteed
Right.
deal with the Spurs. Riley Minix, our boy that we talked about, who maybe could have potentially got that last two-way contract. He did not get the two-way contract because that went to Harrison Ingram, but he is on a training camp deal, as well as Nathan
Nice.
Mensah, another name
Love
that kind of showed out in summer league. Both of those guys probably aren't going to make the roster, just like Malachi Flynn. We'll get into that in a second. But I like these three guys that we're bringing in for training camp. Everybody brings in, the full amount of players, which is 21 that you can bring into training camp. So that's what the Spurs were doing. I will say, I think if, say, like Malachi or Blake just has a really, really, really bad camp and their demeanor's down, I don't think that's going to happen. I'm just saying, if for some reason, it just really doesn't work out, they've got something mental going on, maybe then there could be like a 5% chance that Malachi Flynn could get a roster spot. And the only reason I say that is because he didn't sign specifically a training camp contract. But at the end of the day, me and you texted about this earlier. This is probably just bringing in competition for Blake and Malachi, and also to send a little bit of a message to them like, hey, we're going to bring in other guys. And as much as I just said that as a little caveat there that I did want to acknowledge, Malachi Flynn is 26. Malachi Branham and Blake Wesley are 20 to 21 years old. So
Yeah.
I think even if Malachi Flynn had a 50-point game last April against DeJounte Murray, I might add, which is just kind of, when you look at the highlights, I was like, I'm sure DeJounte was out this game. He actually wasn't. But it was also just, I mean, the Pistons still got blown out in that game that he scored 50. But again, this is just, bringing in another, it's really just training camp depth and also competition and a little bit of messaging to Malachi and Blake, in my opinion.
I would leave it at that as well. He's a crafty veteran. He'll be competitive. He'll probably talk crap, and he's going to put some buckets on some guys' heads and make them have to step up their defensive ability, which to me speaks to Malachi Branham more so than anybody else. So I'm obviously a fan because we needed somebody to fill out the roster, and Malachi Flynn just happened to be the name that we pulled out of the hat.
Yeah, that was when I saw that, I was definitely surprised by it. But for the circumstance that this is, I think it's pretty high value.
Agreed. He'll be gone, so yeah, very high value.
And that's why, again, those guys at the age that they're at, again, as much as I mentioned that caveat, much higher potential and ceiling that we haven't even found out yet. So
Exactly.
But we appreciate you guys for hanging out and listening to this episode today. I didn't even realize this was going to go that long. I didn't think it would, but going through all the box scores, we had a little bit more things to talk about there. But if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to hit like and subscribe below. And if you want to stay updated with the show, be sure to follow us on X or Twitter at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. Tell us y'all's Olympic predictions
Mm,
in the comments, as well as your thoughts on the Lauri Markkanen situation and Malachi Flynn becoming the next Chandler Hutchinson in Spurs glory.
legendary.
We appreciate you guys. We'll catch y'all in the next one. Go Spurs, go.